So, hello and welcome to Why Cases Work, Impact and Engagement in the Undergraduate Classroom. And we're delighted to bring you this webinar with our partners at Ivey Publishing. So I'm Antoinette Mills, Director of Communications at the Case Centre, and I'll be hosting the session alongside my colleague Laura Woodman, who's the Communications Specialist at Ivey Publishing. The case method can be hugely effective with undergraduates and it plays an important role in developing critical employability skills. But we also know that integrating cases into undergraduate programs can be challenging. So our session today is designed to offer some practical tips and insights and some guidance to support you in your own teaching. So a couple of housekeeping points I'd like to cover before we start. Closed captions are available in English, so you should be able to turn them on via the captions button below, or if you can't see that, then through the More menu. So hopefully you should be able to access those okay if you need them. We are recording the session, and we'll be sending you out a link to that in the follow-up email that will come later this week. So before we go any further, we'd just like to hear a little bit about you, just to help us understand who's in the room. So you should now see on your screens a quick poll. And the first question is just about your experience with using cases with undergraduates. So if you can let us know how much you've used cases before with undergraduates, that's great. And then the second question is about the different challenges you face when you're using cases with undergraduates, and you can tick as many of those ones as you want to. So you might identify with all of the challenges or maybe just one or two. So if you could take a moment just to do that, that'd be wonderful. I'm going to be quiet now for a minute and let you complete it. Okay, so I'll end the poll there and I'll share the results on screen. So I guess we have a mixed ability room. No one makes extensive use of cases at the undergraduate level, but other than that, we've got a real mixture of people who use it not at all the way through to quite a lot. And it looks like all of the challenges resonate with people in the room. So finding the right cases, managing large cohorts. So thank you very much, everybody, for filling that in for us. That will really help us. Right, I'm just going to share my screen. Here we go. Right. So I'm going to introduce our speakers for today, and we're joined by three experienced undergraduate case educators. We're really pleased to have them with us. So Julie Goss is a lecturer in Business Foundations at Ivey Business School and co-director of Ivey's Business Foundations programme. She's got over 20 years experience of teaching through case-based learning. Scott Andrews is Head of School and Principal Lecturer in Leadership and Business at Worcester Business School. He's got more than 25 years' experience of leading case method workshops and is the author of several books on the topic. He's also got extensive experience of using cases in undergraduate teaching. And Stephen Lee is Assistant Professor of Management, Information Systems and Entrepreneurship at Carson College of Business. He regularly integrates cases into undergraduate teaching, including on the Introduction to Business course at Carson. So our agenda today covers a variety of different things. We're going to start with a discussion with our speakers about their experiences of using cases with undergraduates, and Laura's going to host this. This is going to form the main portion of our session today. After that, Laura's just going to do a quick session about why Ivey Publishing cases work so well at the undergraduate level. And then I'm just going to take a few moments to show you how to find cases that are suited to undergraduate teaching through our website. And then to finish up, we're going to have a Q&A with our panelists. So if you can share your questions in the chat throughout the session, I'm going to be monitoring those and I'll curate them for the discussion at the end. So I'll sort of acknowledge things in the chat as we go through, but don't worry if we don't answer, we'll be coming back to those at the end. Wonderful. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Laura now to begin our conversation, and I'll see you later on in the session.
Thank you so much, Antoinette. Thank you. And welcome, everybody. As Antoinette said, I'm Laura Woodman. I am the Communication Specialist at Ivey Publishing, and I am very happy to be here to take you through this discussion. So welcome, Julie, Scott, Stephen. I'm looking forward to this. I'm gonna be asking you a series of questions. I will be directing some of those questions specifically to some of you, but all of you can weigh in every case. Let's start with Julie. Julie, my colleague from Ivy. Julie,
Hi, Laura.
so great to see you. I mean, virtually this time. Why do you think the case method works so well for undergraduates? And please share some examples of why it's so great to bring them to class.
Thanks, Laura. So I use cases. I was just looking at the survey poll that was just released, and if I had answered, I would say I use cases exclusively. So in my undergrad classes that I teach, and the courses that are offered in my group, we'll say 99.9% case driven. So I think the main reason why I'm a huge proponent of using cases in the undergraduate any program really is because they humanize what we're trying to learn. So let's think about a case that might deal with advertising or maybe entrepreneurship or leadership. I think it's easy to see how a case that brings a story might be interesting to students and something that they can really dig their teeth in. But what I like to share is how cases really come to life when you're doing more rote material. So my background is in accounting and finance, and anyone out there that deals with that kind of material might be aware that it's, the traditional way to learn that kind of content would be through, learn the formula, memorize the material, do short problems, make sure that you're ready for the exam, and then, poof, the material is gone. But I really, really like cases for quantitative based material because of this humanizing factor. So, when you've got a story around, let's say a certain formula about cash management or, financial statements, it moves away from students sort of just feeling like they've got to do the grind of sort of understanding based content to jumping into a story that has a protagonist, that has maybe a soap opera element to it, which I always love to highlight. And suddenly there's this context all around, sort of, otherwise nebulous, or let's be honest, maybe some dry material. And that's when you're going to get students engaged. So I would say that is the number one reason why undergraduates I find respond so well to case learning, is because you have the opportunity to contextualize and make interesting and compelling, the work that you're doing.
Fantastic. And I think when they're fresh out of high school, fresh out of secondary, where there's so much structure, that change of pace really engages them. You find?
I agree. And I mean, I'll say also, Laura, that probably undergraduates, if you think about what they're responding to, an entertainment element is certainly something that we know that students respond to, story, as I said, context. So any case that you're using will have these elements, and it gives you the opportunity to make the whatever content you're teaching the star of the show, and if the certain formula, cash management cycle could suddenly be the equivalent to, Thor's hammer or Wonder Woman's lasso of truth, then those students are going to take that material and they'll remember it for a lifetime.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Stephen, do you want to add something here? Maybe you have some other examples?
Well, one thing I'll add is I think the other thing that makes cases work so well with undergraduates is that it allows for just a much deeper and complex discussion. And I think was mentioned earlier, a little bit different than what they might be used to, coming out of high school. And I think it's more realistic to what they're going to encounter in the workplace, which is that
Mhm.
situations are complex. There's not always going to be a straightforward solution, and this really gives them exposure to that, and I think kind of gives them a different way to think about things.
Absolutely. Scott, any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I love, thanks, Laura. I love the case method with my undergraduates. It brings a real slice of reality, doesn't it, into the classroom. I was reminded, just as we were sharing just now, of an old Confucius statement that says, tell me and I will listen, show me and I will observe, involve me and I will learn. And that's what the case method is all about, isn't it? It's about getting involved. It's about rolling our sleeves up, immersing our students in real life situations, getting them involved in the story. Julie mentioned the story, getting our students involved in that story process. We don't listen to stories, we join in. And when we join in, we meet many sides of ourselves that we can take back to our real worlds when the playing is over. All that stuff that's caught as well as taught. And in my discipline, I look a lot at leadership and management, and there's so much around leadership practice that has to be captured and caught in the story and the narrative. And so it's a great opportunity for students to understand and discover things about themselves that they can take back to that real world when the playing's over.
That is so true. Fantastic. Scott, let's continue with you. From your
Okay.
experience, what are those key ingredients for a successful undergraduate case session? And some
Sure.
common mistakes if you want to add some.
Okay, yeah. Well, I often think ingredients. I mean, occasionally I find myself in the kitchen baking. I think about that mixing bowl, and I think about pouring all the ingredients into the mixing bowl and the essence that comes out of that. And I'm thinking, well, if the mixing bowl is my learning community, my classroom, and if the essence from the case session is learning, then what are those key ingredients that I need to put into that mixing bowl to make sure that that learning is taking place? And it begins by looking at both myself and my students. It begins about making sure that both I and my students are prepared before they even come into the classroom. Am I giving them the case in sufficient time to make sure they've read it, they've prepared it, and they're aware of the expectations when they come into the classroom? Have we ran an induction session where our students are trained to understand what they can expect from the classroom? I remember a long, long time ago, Professor Ray Goldberg from Harvard was running a case study that I was participating in, and he described himself. I have three jobs, he said, as part of his preparation. He said, I'm the scribe. I write things down. I'm the question master. I'm going to ask you questions, and I'm the learning facilitator, he said, but I'm not the problem solver. That's your job. So it's actually understanding what the expectations are for our students in the classroom. It's understanding what our roles are as the facilitator of learning, making sure I'm prepared, making sure they're prepared in advance for that classroom discussion, that I'm armed with an armory of questions that are going to allow me to navigate with the students that journey through the case data that takes me from the beginning to the key learning objectives at the end of that journey, but opportunities not just for breadth, but questions that allow depth of inquiry and analysis along the way. And you asked me, well, what about the pitfalls? The challenges to a certain degree, of course, is that we can actually be sometimes over controlling. We like to have control in our classroom, but sometimes a really effective case experience is where we're empowering our students to be responsible for part of that journey through the case data. To make sure we're not over prescriptive, to make sure perhaps that we're not answering our own questions. We may be the question master, but let's allow a little bit of space. And again, another Harvard professor reminded me a long time ago that it's absolutely okay to have a little bit of silence in the classroom. Let's not be too afraid of silence, because that's where we allow the students to be drawn into the discussion.
Those are great points. Silence sometimes can scare any instructor, even the most experienced ones. Julie, do you have any mistakes to avoid? What are your takes?
Scott, I really liked what you said, and interesting that you ended with that piece about silence. So many things go unsaid in a case classroom, and I think it's being aware of sort of the moderator techniques. I mean, you did a great job of sort of describing the three different roles that we might be taking, but also things like, and maybe we've heard of this before, a technique called yes and. So this would be something that you might learn about as a technique in theater, let's say, or acting and that kind of thing. But it's a tool that I find really works well. So if you're in a situation where you're not getting the kind of responses that you want. You're in a situation where students might be, they're a little lukewarm. Everyone's nervous in the room. It's taking the material that they are giving you and then extracting the value out of it and saying yes. And so yes, let's take this and how can we build this up? So I would say that's a great way to sort of steer away from the conversation that you don't want to be having and opening the conversation that you do.
Great. Stephen, any thoughts?
One more I'll add just around planning and preparation is when I'm teaching undergraduates, one thing I do have to keep in mind is just the impact of selecting an appropriate case and just recognizing that a lot of these students may not have much of any work experience. And so there's some cases that are great at, for, I guess, depending on how if these are upperclassmen or underclassmen, some classes might be great for graduate students, but for first year student, it's just going to be a little bit difficult for them to relate to or understand that context, which, as we've heard, is one of uh, uh, the benefits of using the case approach. And so just kind of be thoughtful about knowing where your students are coming from, and making sure that the case context is something that's going to be relevant and interesting and engaging to them.
Yes. Let's continue with you, Stephen, now that I have you. What about large undergraduate cohorts, those big classes? What strategies have you found effective for engaging all students in the room and ensuring that the conversation is meaningful?
Yeah, so just for context, I teach about 70 students at a time, and I find that that certainly can add some additional challenges compared to, like a 30 or 40 student type of section. And so the two things I have found helpful, one is just thinking about how I provide structure and guidance for student preparation, and then just being intentional about the format of the class discussion. So from a preparation standpoint, I oftentimes give students small assignments in advance just to help guide their thinking, because I find that the quality of the discussion oftentimes depends on how prepared students feel, especially in those larger settings where they might feel a little more intimidated or less confident. And so giving students that time before class and almost giving them a preview of what we might be talking about so they can gather their thoughts and have some ideas before they arrive in class, I find that helps them to prepare for being engaged in a discussion. Second thing, so in terms of the format of the discussions, most of the time I end up splitting students into smaller groups. Again, a lot of times I find students are more comfortable sharing ideas in those settings. And it also gives them a little more confidence to share with the full class once they've had a chance to, test their ideas out with their peers. Even within those smaller groups, you can vary the format. And so there's times where I will assign groups different perspectives, and with the intention of facilitating more debate with the full class. Other times, the focus with those smaller groups is to come to a consensus and talk through their disagreements, understand where different perspectives might be coming from. And so, depending on the purpose of the case, you can change the structure of those small group discussions. And lastly, even just from like a role and responsibilities perspective, sometimes I find it's helpful to have students rotate who's leading their small group discussion, who's taking notes, who's reporting out to the full class, who's playing the role of devil's advocate, and that can give every student kind of a sense of a unique role or purpose within their group.
Very well. Scott, do you also teach large classes?
I do sometimes. So most of my classes tend to be smaller because I do a lot of exec teaching now, but I have taught quite a lot of large classes, as many as 300 in the room at any one time. Sometimes, of course, in the virtual room as well. And so if we're teaching in virtual classes, as in one sense we are today in that virtual class, then of course that creates interesting challenges too. One of the things that I find really helpful is polling, taking quizzes, online polls. And I think these are really, really helpful opportunities when working with large groups for three reasons. I think just as we took that poll at the beginning of our session today, it gets everybody involved. So everybody, regardless of how confident they feel about the case, particularly if you're offering an anonymous poll, so people aren't having to identify themselves, it gives people an opportunity to engage or re-engage if they've disconnected. It also is an opportunity to change a pace, isn't it, a little bit in the discussion. So if you feel like the discussion's kind of coming towards an end, or you need to come towards some form of consensus to be able to move on to the next thing, a poll's a great thing to do. And actually, just the physical act, I tend to use something called Vivox quite often for my polling. And I'll say, hey guys, get your phone out, scan this QR code, and we're just going to get some quick feedback on where we think we're at with this. And the physical act of changing what we're doing in the classroom or in the virtual classroom at that time, it kind of re-engages, it awakens people, the pace has changed. And then finally, of course, I've got some really good feedback. So when I'm trying to sense check where my class is at, whether they've captured all the key learning points so far, I've got some of that feedback, and I'm inviting a bit of reflective practice on their part as well as the discovery learning elements of the CAS discussion.
Thank you. Very good tips. Julie, any tips, any quick tips about engaging large groups?
Yes, so I've taught up to, I would say on average 80, but certainly up higher as well. And I think Scott and Stephen are talking about some great techniques that you can oftentimes prepare ahead of time. But sometimes you're in a classroom and you're getting the feel that, we've got to have some variability. So what I would add is something called, or I term it buzz groups. So it's not necessarily planned, it's something you're feeling in the moment, and it's all right, we've got this, digestible issue, small. Speak to the person next to you. We're going to do this for 30 seconds or a minute max. And then, then we're going to take it up as a group. So something like that can chunk it out, and it really helps to, give people a chance to regroup and push the thinking forward.
That's great. Now let's talk about diverse groups, which is something that we see a lot here in Canada. And I'm talking about diverse backgrounds, neurodiversity, all that beautiful wide array of things that our students bring with them. How do you make sure your case engages everybody in the room when that diversity of backgrounds is present? Julie, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I I was waiting for you to refer to Scott or Stephen.
Yes.
That's one of the reasons why I absolutely will be, one of the strongest advocates for casework. I think that this vehicle is probably the best that I've used that can speak to a vast group. So you mentioned neurodiversity. We've got other kinds of diversities. I spend a lot of time in undergraduate classes that come from different faculties, right? If you're teaching a survey course, so I look forward to those classes that are really mixed, because that's when you're really going to see things come alive. So I think acknowledging the differences, but also making sure that we are holding on to a common thread. And I think we'll probably get to this, but one of the pieces that I find is integral to case learning is the piece of contribution. So the part where the student is not in a passive role, where the student is active and contributing and raising hands. And, as Scott said, we're moderating that situation. So one of the things that can galvanize the group is saying, we are all coming together to work towards this goal. Let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. Raising your hand and contributing in front of a bunch of strangers or in front of a bunch of peers is an extremely big ask. So let's relax and let's understand that we're in this together, and understand why it's important that in a diverse group that we take the contribution aspect even more seriously.
Fantastic. Stephen, any tips on how to engage those mixed groups, as Julie said, diverse groups?
Yeah, one thing I'll add is so I think just setting the expectation around the importance and value of their diverse backgrounds. And I think it's kind of mentioned earlier that we learn through these discussions, and helping students recognize that sometimes we learn the most when we hear the more unique, less commonly held perspectives, and that could be due to your personal experience, your past background, and so giving students that confidence that what makes them different is really valuable to our learning and for the rest of their peers to be able to make a good and holistic decision for these cases.
Great. Scott's, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, how well do we know our learners? Because I
Mhm.
think the more that we can get under the skin of our learners, the more we can know about their histories, their background, the more we can draw alongside, we can draw examples, we can be informed to make sure that our approaches are appropriate for the context that they've experienced from their background. So I know that in my undergraduate program this year in September, 42 different nationalities joined us. So I'm very aware, I know which countries they came from. I know something about the geopolitical histories of some of those countries. I've been able to discuss informally with some of those students some of the histories that they've come from. And I'm able to draw just not, of course, I don't know all of my students, but I'm able to draw some examples out, which are, in a sense, inviting other students then to say, well, actually, in my culture, this is what we might do in that situation. Or yeah, I've worked in a company a little bit like that, and I would do this. So it's actually trying to understand and to get to know as much as I can about the individuals in the room before we start planning how we're going to work with those guys to really plan that journey through the case narrative.
I like that. I've been an international student, and I know how meaningful it is to feel that your instructor is interested in your background. I think that's a great approach. Now, Scott, let's talk about those educators that have their class set, planned, and everything, but would like to fit cases into that existing course. Do you
Okay.
have any strategies for them?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I think that if I'm looking at where and how to fit cases into existing courses, I guess there's probably three things I'd really need to get right and to ask questions about. First of all, what will be the purpose of the case? What's the type of case that best meets that purpose? And I want to ask a question about shelf life, which I'll come back to in a moment as well. So by purpose. I think the first question is, how do our students know what the case is really there to achieve? If I can ensure that there's a real clarity about what this case is there to do within the learner journey, then I can start to segue that into the right part of the curriculum. So, for example, is this case that I'm going to be wanting to use going to be applying something that of good management practice or theory that these students already know or that they've already encountered, or is this going to be developing their understanding of a new context? So, in which case, I need to know what prerequisites do they need to have already in the curriculum before they're ready for this particular case experience. Am I taking an inductive or a deductive approach to learning? Am I theory developing, or am I applying theory that's already known? Is this an analytical type case? In which case, what kind of analytical skills do they already need to have honed in order to be able to be ready for the case discussion? So there's those questions around what the purpose of the case is there to do. There are questions around the type of case study. I'm very mindful there's all sorts of different types of cases that we can bring into our curriculum. There's a growing interest in working with compact, short cases, sometimes single issue cases that probably require very little pre-planning on the part of the student in advance of that class discussion. You could even probably just segue that into an existing 2-hour session that you're running with your students where you're just looking to change the pace of that particular session. And then you compare that to the very complex simulation case or multimedia case that's going to require a lot more pre-planning on the part of the student and on yourself. And so, again, where's the best place to position that within curriculum to make sure that your students are both have the right mindset, but also the right tools to be able to know how to plan and prepare for that. And then, if I may, shelf life, and this is just a kind of a personal reflection, really. What case are we looking to bring into this pre-existing course, and is this the right case, the right fit? Sometimes I think we can have our pet favorite cases, can't we? They've worked for us well in previous courses, and so we just want to kind of shoehorn that case study in, and we need to ask ourselves: is our case genuinely in date? Is it time to refresh our case collection, our favorite cases? Is it in touch or out of touch with where our learners are at? And is it within reach or out of reach? And I'm very aware, of course, that it's very easy to bring in familiar Amazon and Apple and Google cases because everybody's heard of those organizations, but probably very few of my students are going to work for those organizations afterwards. So am I looking at developing case opportunities that provide real opportunities for students to step into the shoes of the protagonist in the case in a way that actually will prepare them for the real workplace that we're looking to equip them for as they progress from their studies?
Fantastic. Julie, do you have any thoughts for those people who really want to integrate cases into their existing courses?
Scott, I agree with everything you've said there. One thing I would add is you talk about relatability and I guess digestibility. So what I would say is consider the length of case that you are introducing. So if it's new or you're introducing students that are unfamiliar, bringing in what I would say a very long read can overwhelm students, and frankly, to new case instructors, it can overwhelm as well. So you want to really consider the length of the read, where you would have something like a short read. I think we've heard that before, and a long think. And that's going to make sure that students don't feel overwhelmed. They can manage the material. And like I said, the digestibility, I would say in this case, is probably important.
Great. And Stephen, any thoughts?
Yeah, building on what Julie just shared, I would also say sometimes I found, if you're easing students into cases, sometimes I'll provide a little extra guidance for that first case, kind of narrow the focus just a little bit, not too much so it's restricted, but just so that, they're not too overwhelmed with all the possible ways they could go about thinking about this case. And the other thing I would say is, making sure that students do have enough time and space within class to really process through that case discussion. I know sometimes when we're trying to fit in a case, we're trying to squeeze it in, and we want to hold on to our old course materials. But I think without sufficient space in class, sometimes it doesn't really allow you enough space to really have that rich discussion about the case.
Thank you. Fantastic. Well, we have time for one more question, and it will be more of an open question to the three of you. What are those final tips that you have for educators that maybe are teaching for the very first time with cases and are teaching undergrads? Final thoughts, final quick tips. Stephen, you want to go first?
Sure. And I think this is a sentiment that's been kind of mentioned throughout our panel discussion today, but I would say being prepared, but also being flexible. And so what I mean by that is, as an instructor, make sure you understand what the key learning points are going to be, the key takeaways, ways you can transition to that. But also just be willing to go with the flow. And, sometimes students are going to bring up something. Actually, I find most classes, one student will bring up something that I hadn't really thought about, something new, and I think be open to that, because sometimes that's kind of a segue into a very rich discussion, and so don't be afraid to take a detour if you spot something that is worth discussing further, and you can balance that with being able to tie things back to your learning points and takeaways at the end of class.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. Julie, any final quick tips?
I would say get excited. That's one thing about using cases, is that if be prepared to find a case and sort of experiment with it, and then realize that actually this is a great way to engage with students. It's a great way to learn. It really adds a lot more color, depth, and richness than you could have imagined. So be open to that process, as Stephen said, but also be ready to want to integrate more cases and more cases and more cases. It's a bit of an addictive quality, I'd say.
Yeah, we're very passionate about cases at Ivy.
We
I
are.
honestly share your sentiment. And finally, last but not least, Scott, any final
Wow.
quick tips?
Thanks, Laura. I couldn't agree more with Julie and Stephen there. I would say keep it simple. If you're doing this for the first time, don't overcomplicate things. If you're feeling really unsure, work with some of those shorter, compact cases first. Have a clear map, teaching plan that you're taking with you. Consult with the author's teaching note if there's a teaching note available, because they'll give you insights into how they've used it in class in the past. And in Ivy and the Case Centre and other places, there's some great training resources and webinar resources and handouts and things like that that you could have a look at to help with top tips for that first engagement in the classroom. So use the material that's out there because there's loads of great training.
Fantastic. Well, thank you to the three of you. This has been a very rich discussion. I don't teach, and even I want to get into the classroom. Fantastic, absolutely. You're not going anywhere. Everybody there know that you're not going anywhere. The panelists will stay. They will be until the end, so they will be able to answer some of your questions with Antoinette. So thank you so much. Now I want to share a little bit about Ivy Publishing. I have a bit of a presentation here for all of you. As you know, we're talking about cases in the undergraduate level, for the undergraduate level. Well, how do you find those cases? Well, Ivy has them. If you need them, we have them. But first, let me just share a little bit about Ivy Publishing. For those who may not know us very well, Ivy Publishing, we're part of Ivy Business School at Western University. Western University is located in London, Ontario, the little London here in Canada, with over 40,000 students. It's top 1% in the world, and at a university that we're very proud to be part of here in Southwestern Ontario. Beautiful campus. And in that campus, we have Ivy Business School. Number one in terms of MBA here in Canada, and for a number of years, I must say, and a global case leader. And we're very proud of that at Ivy Publishing to be leading that. And obviously, we have been the academic home of very influential alumni that we're very proud to see succeeding out there in the world. Ivy Publishing today, we have a huge collection, a huge catalog of learning materials with close to 50,000 learning materials. And specifically our cases that we publish, we're nearing 10,000 by now. And those cases have been written by over 8,000 authors from over 50 countries, which is also something that we always like to highlight, the diversity of perspectives that are present in our case collection. We are very busy here. We publish, we like to say, a case per day or more than 30 cases a month. And we know for sure that our cases are used in 168 countries around the world, so classrooms in countries around the world. We also have co-brand collections. We've been lucky to establish great partnerships with leading institutions around the world. And we are also well known for translating our cases to make them available for business students in their own language, because I think that we all believe that case discussions are much richer and much more engaging if you can discuss them in your own language. Now, what do we do specifically? Well, we are, as I said, a publisher, a distributor, and a supplier of cases and other learning materials. And what are those learning materials? Obviously cases, but we also have industry notes, exercises, articles, and role plays. My personal favorite, I have to say. We also have a selection of multimedia products, including interactive case studies, video content, supplemental materials, and simulations. And who doesn't like simulations? I think whoever teaches with cases probably has ever included simulations in their class. They're very, very interesting and engaging. Now, how can you find these learning materials? Well, first of all, you can check our storefront, ivypublishing.ca. There you'll find, as I said, close to 50,000 learning materials available. And you could also find us through our global network, because we are in partnership with many other platforms. So we're everywhere, find us. Now, how to get started. You're teaching undergrads. You don't know where to start. There's so many cases and learning materials that is getting overwhelming for you. Well, first of all, sign up to our case alert emails. Easy to do on our website. You just add your email, sign up, and you'll get every 3 months, every 2 months, I think, at this point, a selection of our latest learning materials that we have available. We also have bestsellers and classics very easily accessible on our site. You can see just to get an idea of what kind of learning materials you can implement in your classroom. And if that doesn't work and you want something more personalized to your specific undergrad class, we also have a case concierge service that you can reach out to us, and our team will definitely help you find that specific case that you're looking for to engage with that specific classroom, because we know that 2 classes are not the same and you're teaching anywhere in the world, so we really want to be there for you. Also, it's not just cases, not just learning materials. We also have a wide selection of resources that can help you if you're teaching, that can help you if you're writing cases and you don't know where to start, or that can help you if you want to help your students learn better with cases. So check out our website. There's a lot of content that I am personally very proud of, and that will be very, very helpful to you. Now, how to get started? Create an account. It's free. Educator accounts are free for all educators with your institution's email. So right now, take 2 seconds, scan this QR code, and get started. We really want to be there in your journey, whether you're teaching undergrads, as we're discussing today, or you're teaching MBA in MBA programs or more. So we're really, really happy to help. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Laura. That's been really interesting. That was a really fascinating panel discussion. We've had lots of questions, so I've been gathering those and we'll come back to those in just a moment. I'm just going to take the opportunity to share a little bit about the Case Centre and what we do. So let me just... this is our website. You guys have all found it already because you registered for this webinar. We do distribute cases, but we are the independent home of the case method and we're a registered charity. So distributing cases is part of what we do. You'll find I've been sharing a few of the resources in the chat actually. So I'm going to focus mainly on finding cases now, but I would really encourage you to come to our site and find out how we can support you as a case teacher and a case writer, especially if you're new to the case method. We have scholarships that you can apply for new case writers and new case teachers, and lots of resources on the site. And in fact, a couple of articles that I wanted to highlight. We had one in October about whether AI is killing the case method, and we were lucky to have the Ivey Dean, Professor Julian Birkinshaw, contribute to that. So that we'll include a link to that in the follow-up email, but that's a really interesting perspective on AI and how that's affecting case teaching. So that's a really great article. And also at the beginning of December in our newsletter, we're going to have an article on dealing with silence in the case classroom. And it was really interesting that Scott and Julie, you all picked up on that. And some of those techniques you were talking about are covered in that. So I would encourage you to come to our website and subscribe to that newsletter. You'll find lots of features every month that will be really useful for your case teaching. So I just wanted to show you very quickly, again, very like Ivey, we have a lot of different resources, but as the one-stop shop for cases, you can see the range of case collections that we carry is very vast. I'm going to just nip through to the Ivey page, if I can find Ivey, there we are. So you can find out about each of the collections that we distribute. They each have different strengths and different focuses. So this is the Ivey page, and if you want to click through to see the whole Ivey collection, you can do this really easily here. And as Laura said, lots of the Ivey cases are really well suited to undergraduate teaching. Once you've found all of the cases, you can use the filters. So we're just going to look at cases, and then we're going to narrow it down. So we started off with over 10,000, so it's really quick and easy to narrow it down to what you want to look at. We'll look for marketing cases. And then thinking about undergraduates, you want something that's really highly topical. So we're going to look at cases that have been published in the last 2 years. And I think one of the things we really hear is, it needs to be an engaging topic, but actually the shorter the better. So we have a filter for the length of the case. So I'm going to choose 6 to 10 because that's quite a nice length for a case. You can see here, I'm just going to click through to the product, that when you're logged in as an educator, you get some information, you get the abstract, but you also get some information about teaching and learning. So you can see here, this item is suitable for both undergraduate and postgraduate courses. And also you get some learning objectives right on the screen for you to help you decide if it's right for you. In this green box at the top, this is where you get all the good stuff. So to see an educator preview copy, you simply click, and it should appear magically in your screen for you. We'll just give it a second to think about what it's doing. Here we go. There you go. So you can look at the full copy and make sure that it's suitable for your teaching. And also, really importantly, you can view the teaching note. As Scott mentioned in one of his responses, seeing the teaching note that the author has written is a really good starting point. Your teaching may be slightly different, you may have a slightly different focus, but this gives you a good shortcut into what the author was thinking. And if you are interested in using a case in class, you can either add it to your basket and buy a link that you can put on your own VLE or LMS. Or if you want students to pay for the materials themselves, you can take advantage of our course pack facility, which you can set to student pay rather than school pay. So that's a good way to make material available, but in the model where your students buy it. Then we do have a range of different licenses and paper copy models. We'll include some links to those in our follow-up email. I also shared a link in the chat to our Learning with Cases guide. You will see Scott's face on this. We developed this really to support students in their learning with cases. We know it can be really challenging, and especially students at the undergraduate level, they may never have encountered anything like a case before and will want to know where to get started. So this is available for free for our member organisations, and there's a small cost for students who aren't at our member organisations. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. Right, I'm talking really quickly because I want to get to the questions because we had some really good questions come through. If you do have any more questions about what we do or what Ivey do, then we'll make sure that my email and Laura's email are in the follow-up email, so you can always get in contact with us. I want to start with AI. We've had quite a few questions about AI and how that's affecting case classes. So I think maybe if we start with student preparation and how they're using AI and what effect that can have on your case classes. So maybe if we start with you, Julie, how has AI really affected your case teaching, and what have you found to be helpful with that as a challenge?
Sure. I think there's a few ways to cut the issue. Now, for this discussion, I'd say how are we dealing with things like ChatGPT and Gemini, et cetera, in the classroom? And then what does it mean for how you assess? So you're testing. So your question was focused on the classroom part. So I'll talk about that. I think it's terrific. So we all know the cautionary tales, but one thing I love about undergrads is that they will always be 10 steps ahead from us. So even if we know that AI can present challenges in the classroom, and we might have different opinions about that, it doesn't matter. The students are using it. So that's where I would say is understand that for students, this is an important tool. So it's important to get on board. I think again, the flexibility of the case method is terrific. So I think it can elevate the conversation. So I mean, Scott was referring to earlier about how he might use the app that he referred to sort of do a quick poll, and where we might have said, hey, Google this really quick. Now students, like what ChatGPT can build back right in the moment is actually can only help the case discussion in terms of focusing it, adding another piece, bringing in maybe some credibility that, you know, and even some street cred, let's say, with students. So I think it's important not to be afraid of it. It's important to think about how you're going to use it. And I said, I think my discussion about assessments would be very different. But for classroom use, um, you know, I think it's something that adds another element that just, you know, the case method is perfect for onboarding.
Thank you. Yeah. I think we hear that a lot, and people are often scared of what AI is going to do to their case discussions. But like you say, embracing it and making use of it and making students go that extra mile in the case discussion, it's really positive for that. We did have questions about AI and assessment as well. So maybe if I come to you, Scott, it does present different challenges
Yeah.
for assessing students. So maybe touch on that.
And I agree with everything that Julie just shared. I think that the peril is we could become a slightly overprotective when it comes to putting safeguards in with AI, which, as Julie said, our undergraduate students are already 10 steps ahead of us, and they're going to use it no matter what we say. So let's just embrace that. If I may, really quickly as well, wearing a different hat, Antoinette, I'm the vice president of our Chamber of Commerce, and every business leader that I talk to at the moment are talking about how they're integrating AI into the workplace. So this is an employability skill that our students need to have, not something we need to protect from our students. So I'm aware that the Case Centre have had some fantastic opinion pieces and articles that you've produced around working with engaging with AI positively in the classroom and for assessment purposes. And I would say, because I have a department of computing here in my business school, we are strong encouragers, disruptors, if you like, positively encouraging our students right from the get-go to work with AI, but to work with it responsibly. So if we can give them the tools to manage AI responsibly right from the very beginning, including within all of our case classes, then actually, as Julie said, it adds value and a richness to the case learning experience. Now, that might mean that we need to change the way in which we think about assessment, and it might mean that we need to consider different assessment objectives. But actually, you can nuance so much within the case class scenario that you can actually positively encourage your students to work with AI to address some of those analytical and critical issues in a class discussion and in a report afterwards, and then invite them to critique how AI has constructively helped them to review that situation. So rather than hide it, let's have it in the open, as it were, in a constructive critical review, and see AI as our critical friend rather than as public enemy number one.
Brilliant. No, I totally agree. Stephen, do you have anything to add to that conversation on AI?
Yeah, this is something I'm thinking about a lot in my current class. And I totally agree with what Julie and Scott have shared. Um, I think part of it is providing students with some very clear guidance on what is that ethical use of AI. What are helpful ways they can use it in for the way we're studying these cases. And so one could be, yeah, I've had a lot of students where they'll say, there's a part of a case I just didn't really understand what this meant because I don't have the relevant background, and so I can ask ChatGPT to phrase it in a different way to help me understand it, right? That can be helpful. I really like Scott's suggestion about, critiquing the output they're getting from ChatGPT and not taking it for granted. Now, the drawback I've seen is, the worst case scenario I'm trying to avoid is students know they could take the case, throw it into ChatGPT and say, tell me what I should do. Give me the opinion that I should have. But I found that, students who do that aren't the ones that are learning, when we come in for our class discussions. And so I think, I'm upfront with the students. I know you can do some of this work without thinking about it and just plugging it into ChatGPT, but you're really shortchanging yourself in this learning, journey. And so I think, the students who are motivated, they see AI as a supplemental tool, but they also, are incentivized to protect their own, learning and critical thinking ability.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And actually, there's a question that kind of follows on from that a little bit about students coming into the classroom with what they see as the right answer and refusing to be swayed from that. I think there probably is the danger of that with ChatGPT. They think they've got the right answer. How do you handle students that are, so sold on one answer and not prepared to discuss it anymore? Stephen, do you want to start?
Um, so I don't think I've encountered that quite as much. I have had some situations where students have very strong opinions, and I think it can be sometimes a little bit difficult to manage that. But I think sometimes I kind of put in the context of, hey, look, in the workplace, you're also going to have people with very different and very strong opinions. So how can we work through this discussion in a constructive way and help them to kind of see the value, even if you don't disagree with someone else's perspective, at least see the understand where they're coming from, right? And that way you can communicate to and talk to people who might have very different opinions. And so it's okay if you don't arrive at the same conclusion, but at least understand why someone might have a different opinion as you.
Mhm. Julie, do you have anything to add to that?
I'd say that I've seen that a lot, and I think that's one thing I relish about the case method because it does allow for that. I mean, that's the point of it sometimes, right? Like you do want students to be provoked, and you want students to be able to articulate their position. So I think what Stephen said, you want those things, but you want them to also be open, and good critical thinkers. So I will often say, all right, so, we've got this perspective. Who's with this student? Let's flesh it out. What are the main points that's supporting this position? And then, I mean, typically there'll be students in the class that don't agree. So, all right, if we're on the other side of this argument, raise your hand. What's the first point that we've got against this? And structuring and in the moment sort of pros and cons debate about that. You're using that student's very strong position to then build out, a pros cons critical thinking conclusion. And again, the case method will help you do that in a way that you want.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Right. I think we've got time for one very quick last question that I wanted to come to. So, Scott, I'm going to throw it to you because we haven't heard from you in a second. And it's about assessment again. But how do you assess participation in an undergraduate class? And how do you keep track of all the different student contributions and assess based on that?
Okay, well, I've got various different thoughts on this. Very clever people, much cleverer than me, are actually using AI to do this. So that's the first response. If you've got the right savvy training and technology in the space, then use the technology to help you with that. I've had these conversations with many case facilitators who've been teaching even longer than I, and there's most certainly an etiquette to capturing feedback. But I think that actually part of this is about making sure that you're asking the right questions in the right kind of ways. Without going back to what I said earlier, if you're telling students to be polling on here and you're capturing some of that feedback on the polling, then that gives indicators of engagement and of where that engagement lies. What I would say is that there's good examples of where if you're actually using cases in an assessment context and you're assessing contribution as part of a formal assessment process, then clearly you need to make sure that you know exactly the layout of the students in the room, that you've got your own kind of version of that there on the paper in front of you. So you've got that as your map that you're working with. And you adopt your own shorthand, and so there's an element by which you can already have a pre-prepared template that you're working with to help you to capture that in real time. The other thing that I'd say is, of course, that's where your research assistants come in really handy too. So if you've got teaching assistants that you can bring into the room, you might be facilitating that discussion, but you've got others who are equipped, trained with a planned process for how they're capturing that contribution. And then, as one old professor once shared with me, he always scuttles back very quickly to his office for 10 minutes and locks the door straight afterwards and makes sure he's making sense of all those shorthand notes and everything, putting them into good order so that he can capture some constructive feedback that he can add to the notes that have been made on those contributions.
Wonderful, thank you. I can see lots of nodding. So as we're out of time, I'm going to wrap up there. But thank you so much. It's been so interesting to hear from you all your different perspectives. So thank you so much to all of you for joining us. Thanks to everybody who's come along. We've had a really great attendance, and thank you for all the super interesting questions. It really helps us come back to you with what you need to know. So thank you so much for participating. And we really hope you found it inspiring and that you're going to go away and use more cases in your undergraduate teaching. Our follow-up email will include a link to the recording, along with some links to the resources that we've shared today and some other things that we think you'll find useful. And we would love to hear your feedback. So theoretically, Zoom should prompt you when you close your browser window with a link to the feedback form. But if not, we will include that in the follow-up email as well. So really, it's just a big thank you to Julie, Scott, and to Stephen for sharing all of their expertise. We really appreciate it. And also to Laura for facilitating the discussion so expertly. And thank you all for attending. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we hope to encounter you at another one of our events at some point soon. Thank you, everybody.